Thank you, Lucy. Tonight, we're focusing on the intersection of climate change, business, and economic justice. It's a big topic and one that can sometimes feel quite overwhelming. But our panelists this evening are all women who are leading the change with clarity, commitment, and courage. We're incredibly lucky to have their insights and experiences at the table. So this evening, we invite you to listen deeply, ask questions. There'll be plenty of time for that toward the end of the session. Make new connections and leave feeling just a little bit more energized about the change that we can make together. Once again, thank you for being here, and I'll now hand over to my wonderful colleague Eva, who will guide us through the next part of the conversation.
Kia ora. Thanks, Madison. It's my pleasure to welcome tonight's wonderful panelists and you, our wonderful audience as well. But before I start with introductions, I would really just like to emphasise how important this event series is, with raising the profile of women working on climate action in their different spheres. Recent research from Professor Theodora Boniva at the University of Bonn in Germany found that 89% of people around the world want more to be done on climate action, but mistakenly assume their peers don't. And this is a silent majority that can be activated to supercharge action. We wanted to create intersectional events that provide an insight into the work of women on climate action, that showcase work being done and provide a catalyst for further programming and partnerships. Previous events have highlighted NGOs and programs, government policies, tracking New Zealand's climate progress, the work of iwi, and international programs and events. And as Maddie said, this event highlights business, economics, and philanthropy. And now our wonderful panelists. Jo Tyndall is a director of the Environment Directorate at the OECD, where she oversees the implementation of the Directorate's program of work, covering a broad range of environmental issues, including green growth, climate change, biodiversity, quality of ecosystems, eco-innovation, circular economy, and resource productivity. She was most recently New Zealand High Commissioner and Ambassador to Singapore, and prior to that served as New Zealand's Climate Change Ambassador in 2010. She also co-chaired the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change's UNFCCC ad hoc working group on the Paris Agreement. And as Climate Change Ambassador, she was the head of delegation to the United Nations climate negotiations with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So Jo is based in Paris at the OECD, and she sent through a video, which I thought we might watch now, if everyone's okay with that, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panelists. Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak at this event, and I am really sorry I'm not able to be there in person. But I find the topic particularly timely and interesting. Women are at the climate change table, including in the Environment Directorate here at the OECD, and where they are in these positions to lead and influence, it is delivering results. Since the 2015 Paris Agreement was adopted, firms with greater gender diversity in management have reduced their carbon dioxide emissions by about 5%, more than those with predominantly male managers. When women hold at least 30% of corporate board seats, companies' climate impact really improves significantly. And this holds true not only for companies, but also for government ministries and grassroots organisations, where research has established a positive link between women's leadership and achieving better environmental outcomes. Well, having said that, of course, there is still plenty of room for improvement. Women remain underrepresented in public environmental leadership positions. In 2023, only 23% of cabinet positions and 32% of environment ministers around the world were women. Only 55 national climate plans explicitly mention gender equality, and a mere 23% recognise women as drivers of change in accelerating climate commitments. So this is one factor that is clearly holding us back on climate action, and it's instructive that only 1% of global climate financing is allocated to organisations led by women. So I've just mentioned the benefits of women in leadership positions. So that means we are seriously overlooking and underfunding the substantial contributions they make to climate solutions. I think it's a well-known fact that the world is way off track in meeting our Paris Agreement goals. Failure to increase the ambition of current nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, would put the world on track for a temperature increase of a pretty unsustainable 2.5 to 3 degrees Celsius. And we are well aware that it's going to be a big challenge for many countries to meet their 2030 targets. And all of this is happening at the same time we are facing some significant international headwinds. There are cost of living pressures in many, many countries around the world. We're seeing some public resistance and backlash to some climate policies, perhaps driven by those cost of living pressures. And especially post-COVID, we've seen significant swings of the political pendulum, and now there are geopolitical and trade turbulence, all of which is tending to distract attention from the triple planetary crisis of climate, biodiversity, and pollution. And again, at the same time, we're daily seeing more severe and more frequent climate impacts with deadly floods, wildfires, and droughts in different parts of the world. So how do we keep, or rather get back on track? In recent years, I think it's probably interesting that the OECD, which has a byline of better policies for better lives, we've successfully broken down both climate and gender silos. We work horizontally across our multiple directorates, with the result that our messaging is increasingly clear and consistent. And if I can boil it down, I would say it is all about designing and implementing climate policies needing to be mainstreamed. It needs to be integrated. And by that I mean especially with national development plans and investment strategies. There needs to be strong and early public engagement. All of that has to be backed up by robust data and transparency, and a gender lens needs to be applied across the board. Now, this is the basic recipe that should drive government policy making, but it applies equally to business. There is a really persistent perception that a choice, a trade-off has to be made between climate action and economic growth and development. We've recently put out a report called Investing in Climate for Growth and Development, and that provides clear evidence to the contrary. To sum up its 3 key messages: first, there's a net economic gain from enhanced action. Ambitious NDCs don't hinder economic growth. Quite the opposite, in fact. In our report, under an enhanced NDC scenario aligned with the Paris Agreement goals, global GDP in 2040 is projected to be 0.2% higher than under current policies. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's important that it's a gain. And the gain is even more if we factor in the accelerating cost of inaction. Climate-related disasters caused losses of $320 billion just in 2024 alone. Ambitious NDCs would reduce systemic risk and could boost GDP by up to 13% by 2100 through avoided damages. The third message is that distributional impacts, including gender, need to be understood and managed to ensure there's a just transition and to maintain public support for the transition, a most important issue as far as I'm concerned. So my call is for the women at the table to champion the clear economic case for climate action, and by doing so, to demonstrate the business success it can bring. And for more women to be brought to the table to drive the change and support the innovation that will deliver an agenda of hope and opportunity. I wish you every success for the event. Thank you.
That was really informative, and just understanding a bit more about what's happening internationally on this space as well. The just transitions that she mentioned is going to be picked up by one of our other speakers tonight as well, by Elly, Rosita Silaban, who I'll now introduce, who's the president of KSBSI Indonesia. She's the only female president to have led a trade union confederation in Indonesia, and is currently serving her second term. She's also a titular member of the General Council of ITUC Global and Asia Pacific, and formerly led the Federation of Garment and Textile Workers. She served as chair of L20 during Indonesia's G20 presidency, and is a member of the Global Coalition for Social Justice and the IEA Clean Energy Labour Council. She's a prominent figure in the Indonesian labour movement. Has also played a key role in advancing gender equality within unions and advocating for decent work and climate justice. She's been actively involved in regional and international labour forums, including collaboration with ITUC and other global union federations. She's also successfully initiated the establishment of the Forum of Major Trade Union Confederations in Indonesia for a Just Energy Transition, for JET, which was declared in 2024. So welcome to Elly. I'll introduce all the speakers and then we'll go through and let them speak. So also joining us online is Elly Tunnicliffe-Glass from Fonterra, who holds the role of Senior Manager Sustainability Strategy. She's responsible for leading the integration of climate-related risks and opportunities into business processes and for preparing Fonterra's climate-related disclosures. She's previously worked in Fonterra's group strategy team, focusing on the co-op's strategic choice to be a leader in sustainability. And before that, worked as a strategy consultant with the Boston Consulting Group. So welcome to Elly. And Cheryl, who's here beside me, is the Executive Director of the Gift Trust, which is a philanthropic fund that provides support and research to their donors, allowing them to give more effectively to the charities they support. In her role with the Gift Trust, she's helped their clients donate over 100 million to charitable causes and has built a strong focus on environmental sector philanthropy. Climate change is a key focus for many of the Gift Trust clients, and they're involved in many collaborative projects. She has over 25 years' experience in the nonprofit and philanthropy sector in New Zealand and the UK. Prior to the Gift Trust, she worked for a variety of environmental charities, including Friends of the Earth UK, Groundwork UK, and the Forest and Bird Society. So has a long interest in this topic as well. And finally, also joining us online is Beith, who is the responsible investment industry for over 20 years, with the first part of her career spent overseas, mainly in the UK. She spent 6 years with the New Zealand Super Fund and then moved to become the head of ESG, which is Environment, Social and Governance at Forsyth Barr. She's responsible for incorporating ESG principles into their firm-wide operations and investment processes, including assisting financial advisors with specific client needs. She's currently a member of New Zealand's inaugural Stewardship Code Governing Committee, a member of the External Reporting Board Stakeholder Advisory Panel, and is also on the Investment Committee, the New Zealand Impact Investor Purpose Capital. So please join me in welcoming them as our panellists for tonight. And we're going to start with Elly. Elly, can you join us online? Oh, there you are. Welcome.
Yeah. Hi.
Kia ora. So we've got a few questions. So maybe if there was anything else you wanted to say about the topic for a couple of minutes, but then we'll head into the first question, which is really just explaining what is just transitions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me today. And nice to meeting you. even though through the monitor, but I would like to share our experience in Indonesia. I just want to share about and answer the question sent to me. What is the transition program? In our understanding, a global framework for a just green economy transition, and also focus on protecting workers as the world shifts from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Support retraining, social security, and dialogue between government, employers, and workers. But right now, we already spread our wings to other stakeholders to talk about the climate change. For example, in Indonesia, the sectors such as coal, agriculture, and fisheries are being affected. Without a just transition, workers could lose their livelihood. And how does it connect women and girls? You know that women often work in vulnerable and also in informal economy. So they facing directly the affected of the climate change, directly affected other problem, and also facing directly the problem inside their livelihood and also in their home. Just transition, fight for women's involvement in the policies and environmentally friendly. But however, right now, the willingness of the workers or the women in Indonesia still less, because there is no sufficient campaign, and also other stakeholders not really focus on that issue, even though lately or since a long time, the women in Indonesia already face the problem about the climate change, especially the women in the informal economy and also in the agriculture. And I also put the role of the ITC Asia Pacific for the workers and women in Indonesia. They support trade unions in climate advocacy through campaign and also training to strengthen workers' capacity to face the climate impact. In Indonesia, International Trade Union Confederation has been working with its affiliation, strengthen workers' voice in energy transition and climate change. We know through the IPIDA and also IKIJET and other partner, ITC support us to build our capacity and also to understand and to raise awareness of the workers about the impact of climate change. Yes, of course. What can women workers do right now? Even though I say that the woman is not really willing or wants to understand the impact of climate change, but through the training and also the campaign, we asking them to join unions and environmental advocacy groups. And also we promote sustainable work practices, for example, save energy and also reduce waste. And also encourage companies to provide gender-inclusive green training and promote climate-friendly work policies. In Indonesia, especially in our organization, right now we have program how to put the content of the climate change and also just transition into their collective bargaining agreement, even though not really easy, but we focus on such a few region right now, and we understand we cannot success if we cannot join or collaborate with the employer association and also other stakeholder. Indonesia's climate and gender strategy, of course, we have it because our organization and other organization in Indonesia invite and also prepare NDCs, includes the principle of climate justice. Even though I always share this to international friend and also to ITC, however, the position paper bring by trade union to government only accept by them, but never actually put it in their document. We also encourage women's participation in forest management and renewable energy, but you know, in the energy sector, it's not really many female join them, and also they still stay behind the table. The challenge we face right now, low involvement of women in climate planning and decision making, because of course, you know, Indonesia, we have many islands. We cannot reach them all right now, but through the ITUCAP and also our partner from Australia and other country, we manage the program and share to them, even though we still continue to choose the priority sector right now to know the issue, especially for they who work in the agriculture, in the garment, and also in the mining sector. As you said in my short bio, last 12th of December, 7 very big confederation in Indonesia agreed to form just energy transition and climate change on behalf of confederation. We have our position paper. We have 6 demands on it. We already gave it to our Ministry of Manpower. We already gave to other like just energy transition secretariat, and soon we will send it to our President of Indonesia, because we have willingness to ask the government to form the like a body or council on behalf of workers and also employer association and government and other stakeholders about the just transition and also climate change. Of course, we have a call to action. The climate change should be in the content will be deep workers protection and also green transition. And women must be at the center of climate solution. And we as trade union can push for equitable policy changes and also education and training for women. So we hope other friend over there who listening us, maybe you also can come to our country and also exchange the experience, because it's not really aware right now, the workers and also women in Indonesia, about the impact of the climate change. But when they facing directly, they only come to the government or they come to institution to asking the support from who the people who see them as a victim. But when we asking them to join to campaign and also to know more about this issue, of course they have a reason. They have no time to eat because they just lost their job, and also they have no money, they have no time because they will seeking another job for informal economy to continue their life. And then we thank for the ITUC in Asia Pacific, especially who engage our trade union with other friend in other country who can support training and training for capacity building in Indonesia. And now on, we only focus in 2 regions, and we succeed to bring like 10 collective bargaining agreement and put the content of climate change and just transition in their collective bargaining agreement. However, the implementation is really important than only put on the collective bargaining agreement. So only that from me right now. I'm here to listening other panelists and also ready to answer your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elly. And it's great that you can stay on the call for questions at the end of the panel. I think you've raised some really important and interesting points about when we take action, and it's not when people are desperate. It's actually putting in some of those levers and interventions earlier on, like with collective agreements, which is what you're saying. So thank you for your contribution, and it's great that you can stay for questions. I'm now going to pass over to Maddie to.
Thank you. Kia ora. So our next panelist is Elly from Fonterra. Kia ora, Elly. So our first question is, tell us about your new dividend scheme to influence and reward climate action from dairy farmers.
Yeah, so this is really quite an exciting one for us at Fonterra Cooperative Group. So more than 90% of Fonterra's emissions are generated on farm, and that's largely from biogenic methane from the cows, but also things like fertilizer use. So it's really, really important that our farmers are along this climate action journey with us. They're really absolutely critical to achieving Fonterra's climate targets and also Aotearoa's climate goals. So when we launched our Scope 3 or on-farm emissions reduction target, one of the things we told our farmers was that this was really critical, and this kind of goes back to Joe Tyndall's point. There's not just an environmental imperative to reduce emissions on farm. There's also an economic imperative, because our global customers are really demanding that they see emissions reduction in their supply chain. And for many of these customers, dairy is a really big contributor to their own greenhouse gas footprint. So we're really delighted over the last few months to be able to announce a couple of new emissions incentive schemes for our farmers, which really makes that demand real for them. The first one is what we're calling an emissions excellent payment. It's available to dairy farmers who reduce their on-farm emissions to below 2018 levels. That's the base year for our climate targets, and who also achieve the cooperative difference framework, which requires them to achieve a range of sort of sustainability and milk quality outcomes. This one is likely to be received by about 5,000 farmers, so more than half of Fonterra farmers, which is really great. I think that shows that the farmer base as a whole is already making really good progress on emissions reduction. The second incentive that we've got is the emissions incentive payment, which rewards farmers who have really among the very lowest emissions footprint in the co-op. It's likely to be received by the top 5% of farmers or thereabouts. And this last one is really particularly exciting because the funding from it comes from two global customers, Mars and Nestle. And this is a totally new revenue stream for us and a completely new kind of customer partnership. And it's really making that customer demand for climate action very real. And as well as inspiring action, it's also making a practical difference for farmers and really helping them to afford the changes that they need to make on farm to reduce their emissions.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. So on to the next question. What are other activities that you're doing through your business and in the community to incentivize climate change?
So perhaps we start within the business. So Fonterra's salaried staff, so pretty much everyone in an office job like me, like many corporates, receives a short-term incentive or a bonus at the end of the financial year. And the bonus is based on a balanced scorecard that covers all sorts of things, including financial performance of the cooperative, health and safety, innovation results, all sorts. And one of the things that it does cover is achievement of our annual emissions reduction target. So there's a really direct financial consequence for our staff if the co-op is reducing their emissions, which I think is really great. That's really built into our core incentive program for employees. But of course, it's not just about employees. We all need to be doing our bit, but it's the whole value chain that needs to be taking action. As I said before, a lot of our emissions are on farm. So I guess, the question's specific about incentives, but I think it's really important also to talk about education and information. There was a survey done of New Zealand farmers probably 4 years ago now, so it's a wee bit out of date. But what that found was that a lot of farmers wanted to take action on climate change. They really believed that they needed to take action, but they didn't know where to start. They were overwhelmed. They didn't know what to do, or they felt it would be too costly. Now, those incentive schemes I talked about before helps to address the costly element. But I think too that the support that we can give farmers in terms of helping them understand the actions that they can take on farmers is equally important. So Fonterra has a team of about 50 sustainable dairying advisors who get out there on farm and advise our farmers one-on-one around the actions that they can take. And each farm also has its own greenhouse gas emissions footprint, and that's updated annually. And that really helps farmers to understand where they're sitting and how they're trending and how they compare to their peers. So all of that kind of comes together and helps farmers understand where they can take action. An additional customer support scheme that we've got is some customer funding to help farmers access tools and services to reduce their emissions on farm. And again, this is quite exciting because while it's not an incentive per se, it is reducing that barrier to entry for farmers who want to take steps to be more sustainable and reduce their emissions, but who might otherwise struggle with those upfront costs.
That's wonderful. I really like the different concepts that you've got there for sort of bringing people along with on the journey. I think it's so important to have those one-on-one conversations, and they're so much more powerful than we often give credit. So that's really interesting. Thank you. So slightly different now. As we saw through Cyclone Gabrielle, rural and coastal communities are often hardest hit by climate change. What are you doing to support rural communities, and what type of support do you think is needed?
Perhaps I start with the second part of the question. So in the wake of Cyclone Gabrielle, one of Fonterra's sustainability grads, who's a fantastic young woman called Forsyth, she conducted a research project on farmers' experiences and support needs relating to these adverse weather events, and Cyclone Gabrielle was kind of front of mind at that time. What she found was that about 60% of participants named worsening environmental conditions affecting the viability of farming as a top concern at that time. And within that, animal feed impacts, farmer mental well-being and financial loss on farm were particular worries in the wake of an adverse event. So I think those are three areas where support is needed. One way that Fonterra is already helping with those needs is by sponsoring the Rural Support Trust. It's a really fantastic charity that I confess I hadn't actually heard of before I started working at Fonterra. You know, I think often those of us who are based in the city aren't so aware of what's going on in rural communities, but this is a really phenomenal charity that's providing all sorts of services to rural communities. They go all the way through from providing phone counselling and peer support to address mental health needs in rural communities, through to providing financial advisors, both one-on-one and also sort of in a group setting following something like Cyclone Gabrielle, to provide advice as to what support might be available if your income's been compromised by the cyclone. And then right through to things like community barbecues for informal support and community building and on-the-ground emergency response. I think they were out, you know, with helicopters and utes getting information and you know, basic needs met in the wake of Gabrielle. Fonterra also supports rural communities through tough times like Gabrielle really directly. We do that through donating dairy food products, physically helping with the cleanup, and also supporting restoration projects after the immediate need has passed. I think, look, these really acute emergency responses are certainly critical. We cannot take our foot off the pedal or leave rural communities stranded. I think we saw with Gabrielle how hard it can be to be in an area that's cut off by road and rail, that maybe is without power for days or weeks. These are really challenging times, and I think we've all got a responsibility to support there. But in addition to that emergency response, I'd really love to see more support for farmers and rural communities to really understand the risks that climate change might bring to their communities over time, and to start to really prepare in advance for the potential impacts of climate change. So really building that preparedness in rural communities.
Thank you. That sort of segues quite nicely into the next question that we've got for you. Are there other things that could be done at a government level or in a partnership to incentivise climate action in your sector?
Yes, I spoke earlier about some of Fonterra's partnerships with our global customers, Mars and Nestle, which are providing funds to incentivise climate action. Another really key partnership for us is with the New Zealand government and other agribusinesses. That's AgriZero. It's a joint venture which is dedicated to accelerating the development and commercialisation of on-farm emissions reduction tools. Methane inhibitors are a big part of that. And so that's a really exciting partnership, because I think while Fonterra has been doing some work on its own, you know, kombucha, our probiotic-based methane inhibitor is sort of the example that you hear about all the time in the media. There's so much more that we can achieve together, and bringing together funding from businesses and government for a sort of a collective pool that can really accelerate some of those most exciting and innovative technologies and opportunities. The New Zealand government's also supporting Fonterra and many other businesses across New Zealand with ECA funding towards the transition from coal to renewable energy in our factories, which is great. Again, that kind of capital injection is really, really helpful for businesses who are needing to make sizable investments in the transition. You know, for Fonterra, we're looking at about $1 billion out to 2030 to get out of coal and really reduce our Scope 1 and 2 emissions. These partnerships are just so valuable. I can't stress enough how important it is that we have collaboration and partnership right along the value chain. I think, you know, the examples that I've shared from, you know, farmers taking action on their own farm through to, you know, with support from customers to access tools and services from the experts in rural communities, you know, right through to the factory processing and government policy settings, all of that comes together to actually deliver climate action. I guess in terms of what else could be done, look, there's no silver bullet. I think we've all got to do our own little piece of the puzzle. But I think something that I'm really conscious of is the need to depoliticize almost climate action. I think we're seeing, you know, in the global political sphere at the moment, climate is becoming a left versus right issue or a political issue. I guess what I would really love to see is just continued collaboration and partnership and really science-based action that can drive the right outcomes to really help us limit warming to 1.5 degrees.
That is an incredible insight. Thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise with us this evening. So I'm just going to pass back to Eva to introduce our lovely Cheryl here, and then we'll have some questions later on.
Cool, thanks, Maddie. So Cheryl Swain is the CEO of the Gift Trust, and we'll just kick into the questions, I think. So what role can philanthropy play in climate action?
Thank you. Yeah, so many of you may be wondering why philanthropy has a seat at the table when it comes to climate change. So I'm really here to talk tonight about the things that the philanthropic sector, or the generosity sector, as I sometimes call it, because philanthropy is a bit of a mouthful, the ways that we can play into climate action and how important it is to both build a movement and also show positive actions taking place. I should say a little bit about the Gift Trust first, for those who don't know us. So I manage the Gift Trust. It is a national philanthropic fund, and what we do is we help individual, family and corporate donors to administer and distribute their funding. We do a lot of research and advice to help them find good causes, and then we liaise with those causes and do the donations on their behalf, helping our donors to make those decisions. We've given away around, well, over $100 million to date since we started, and we're pretty unusual in the philanthropic sector because we've given over 26% of our funding goes to the environment space or to climate change. And that's partly because we've attracted a sort of a niche of donors who are really interested in that field, and it's partly because we've focused a lot of our research on that field, so people know us for that and they come to us. So I think how the philanthropic sector can play a part in climate action is, I'd say it's threefold. One of it is about taking risks and funding innovation. So something that philanthropy can do, which other types of funding can't do or struggle to do, is we can take big risks with our funding. I mean, funding comes from mostly individuals, in this case that I'm talking about at least, or trusts and foundations. They've set this money aside to do good. And so what that means is it doesn't have to be tied to contracts. It doesn't have to be tied to specific outcomes. It can fund innovation and risky, so-called risky things that we want to try and test. And I think things like government funding are just ultimately not going to fund those sorts of things because they have to be tied to outcomes which have to be proven. So one part we can play as a sector is trying to find and highlight those things that need testing, fund them, get them, scale them to a size perhaps that they then can have government sector funding or private sector funding. That's one way. I think the second way we can play a part is by pooling resources and collaborating, funding things together. So a couple of examples of that sort of thing. At the Gift Trust, we run a couple of what we call collaborative funds. So one of them is called the Carbon Critical Fund. It was set up by a couple of business people in Auckland who had made some money and wanted to set some aside to do good, but they actually wanted to open up the fund to others. So what they do is they, with our support, they pre-vet organisations, charitable organisations around the world working on climate change. They have quite a strict set of criteria. So it's not grassroots stuff, it's kind of systems change organisations, and actually they work internationally. And we have a list of around 10 to 12, it fluctuates, organisations that they support. And then the fund is open to the public. So what this means is over time, that fund has distributed, it's been around for about 5 years, and I think it's distributed just under $500,000. But it's made up of people like you and me who might contribute their $20 a month or $50 a month or $100. It's not multi-millionaire philanthropists, this particular fund. And what it means is that funding is pooled and donors feel a sense of able to do something bigger than what their individual dollars would do. So that's one way of pooling, I think. There's also ways that our sector can play a part by collaborating. So there is a lot of collaboration in the sector. There's something called the Climate Action Aotearoa group, which is a funders group, and it's a commitment to climate action. People share resources, tell each other about organisations that need funding. The community foundations around New Zealand do quite a lot of work in this space, and they have a fund called the Kaupapa of National Significance, where they pool resources and again fund things together. But just finally, maybe to that question, I think one of the really important things we can do as a generosity sector is talk about why we should fund climate action and try and get people over this inertia of a lot of people think they shouldn't donate to climate because it's such a big, huge issue, and what could my funding possibly do? And that's something that we hear a lot. So I think talking about it, highlighting it, pooling resources and showing successes might encourage more funders around the world to put funding into this. There's a terrible statistic in the philanthropy sector of around, internationally, about 6% of our funding goes broadly to the environment, and less of that would go to climate specifically. We don't actually have those stats in New Zealand, unless you know of any.
About 1.5 to 2.5% of philanthropic funding is to the environment.
So even worse.
Yeah. We need to lift it up, people.
So yeah, I think talking about those issues is really important in the sector.
Cool. Thanks, Cheryl. I'm not sure how your notes compare to the questions. Did you, what outcomes have you seen from your work and projects at the Gift Trust? Is that?
Yeah, about that. I was going to highlight a few examples of some really positive outcomes. Thought I might do a big one and a small one, and then sort of something that's a little bit more conversational or promotional, if you like, the ways that we talk about climate. The big scale one I'm going to mention is we've been supporting a fund called the Biome Fund for many years. So they basically were set up by an American family who moved to New Zealand, now live in the Wellington region, and they do their philanthropy through the Gift Trust. And they focus very, very specifically, sort of laser focus really on funding regenerative agriculture and ecological restoration. And so they've actually moved tens of millions of dollars into New Zealand from the sale of a company in the States. And that has come through the Gift Trust. So it's a really clear example of some of these things around moving our agricultural industry a little bit, actually back to what our previous panelist was just talking about, helping farmers and people in that space to learn from test examples. So they're actually heavily putting money into organic farming, different types of regenerative agriculture to test ideas. So it's a perfect example of that innovation. The smaller example actually was that Carbon Critical Fund that I mentioned. That's a really important story of impact, but we've got a couple of others that are coming up. So another fund that is being talked about by some clients at the Gift Trust is another fund which will focus specifically on climate. And interestingly, I mention it here because interestingly, the client who wants to set this up has a real focus on women. And I think one of the things we do at the Gift Trust is we try and talk about people's motivations for giving. Giving to climate change might be motivated because of your concern for the environment. It might be motivated by concern for nature and biodiversity, but actually, you know, as something like Project Drawdown showed us, funding education and healthcare for women and girls in developing countries is one of the best things we can do to support climate change. And this particular fund I'm thinking of, that's a really important step. If we can get funding to developing countries to support education for women and girls, it moves the dial. And I think what we need to do is talk to people who are generous about the different motivators, because some people will be motivated by giving to that as opposed to maybe nature-based solutions. yeah, so there's a couple of stories of impact there.
Well, thanks, Cheryl. How important is it for the government, not-for-profit and private sectors to come together to tackle climate change, and how do we support these discussions and coordinated action?
I think the answer to that's pretty obvious. It's important. I just think change won't happen without concerted coordination. Unfortunately, government sector, non-profit sector and private sector are notoriously working in silos, and I don't think that we do always collaborate well. There are some good examples of it, as Eva knows, because she also has, with her other hat on, a day job in the philanthropy sector. There is a forum that's been set up between government and philanthropy sector. So we're trying to come together more to work on strategic issues, so that no matter what colour of stripes the government is, there's kind of a plan to work alongside philanthropy. And I think a topic like climate change, I think just, again, it's already been said, but we can't keep chopping and changing. It's so important that we do come together in a strategic way. I think non-profits working in the climate space in particular have traditionally done a lot of lobbying in New Zealand with government, but there is some increasing changes, I think, to the way that is working. There's some really interesting organisations like Rewiring Aotearoa is one I thought I would mention, because they're looking at lobbying in a different way. They're trying to collaborate with government in many ways, present policies which are already drafted and ready to go. And I think there's some talk around that New Zealand needs to have more expert NGOs like that. There is a new climate philanthropic entity which is going to be set up, formally launched later on this year. They're not publicly launched yet, but they'll be looking at auspicing those types of expert NGOs with a view to them working really closely, I think, with government. And that cross-sector, I think, collaboration is so important. So there's probably many things we can do, but there's no magic bullet to that sort of thing.
Thanks, Cheryl. And the final question we had here was, what do you think is the most important action the government can take to support rangatahi Māori women and girls in the fight for climate justice? And how can young people be included in the decision-making process?
Yeah, I'm by no means an expert on this one, but I just wanted to say there are some awesome organisations out there who are representing rangatahi Māori and the youth voice in the climate space. And I think, you know, what we need is for those, and that's in the non-profit sector, but we need for those organisations to have a voice at the table of power. And I think, as I say, sometimes the way the NGOs, because they're so underfunded in New Zealand, many of these groups, they're volunteer-led, they're tiny, they don't have the resources to get to the table. So I think it's beholden on those of us who fund to perhaps get them the resourcing so that they can get a seat at the table and can be involved in some of these conversations. Yeah, that would be what I would say to that. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Cheryl. And there will be an opportunity for questions as well. And I'm going to pass over to Maddie to talk to Katie.
Kia ora. So now I have the pleasure of introducing Katie from Forsyth Barr. Kia ora, Katie. So our first question for this evening for you is, what work have you been doing at Forsyth Barr on climate action and understanding the impact of climate change? I understand there is some recent research you might have to share with us.
Yes, thanks very much, Maddie, and hi everybody. Sorry about the camera issues at the start. I'm not on my usual laptop, but hopefully we are all sorted now. But yeah, I just thought I'd take a second as well just to introduce myself. And I'm the head of ESG at Forsyth Barr, and a lot of people, it always surprises me, still unsure or are unsure what ESG is. So the acronym stands for Environmental, Social and Governance. And what part of my job is that Forsyth Barr is a wealth manager. And so we're investing our clients' monies in the hope of creating wealth for them. And so one of my jobs is to make sure that both the advisors and also the analysts that I work with are aware of different types of ESG issues and how they can become risks and opportunities for companies, and just to make sure that they are thinking about them when they make investment decisions. But I think, it's always interesting to think about how you end up in a role like this, and especially when it feels like a new industry or a new approach to people, but it's actually something that I've been working on for the majority of my career. And in fact, it started in 2004 when I was over in the UK working for an asset manager. And what prompted me to get into this space was we used to get the sort of large FTSE 100 companies coming through our offices every quarter and talking about their strategies and where they're going in the future. And we had BP there one day, and the CEO of BP, and around that time I'd been researching and looking into how there'd been a oil spill up in the Arctic region, and it started off as a very slow leak that was undetected in their pipeline and just carried on for months and ended up being a huge mess, which was obviously really degrading for the environment, but also very costly to clean up. And I can still remember the CEO's reaction when I asked that question. He literally jumped in his seat. He was not expecting it. And it was just something that I can still remember it very clearly in my mind. And it was a very influential piece of the puzzle for me to make early on in my career, when I connected how companies are part of the problem, but can also be part of the solution. But also, as an investor, if you raise your voice on these issues and if you ask questions about them and tell them that sort of some types of behavior are not acceptable to us as shareholders on behalf of our clients, then it really hits home and you're actually in quite an influential seat, and they do listen to their top shareholders. So that was a very sort of a cornerstone piece of my career, I guess, and where I sort of started out on this route that we're on today. But back to your question. So my job at Forsyth Barr really has three hats. I write research, so I'm often narrating on what New Zealand companies, the large listed ones, including Fonterra, are what they're doing as they transition to a low carbon economy. And I'm always coming with the investment lens and how they're placing themselves for a future that's going to be very different to what it is today. That's one angle. The second angle is that I help advisors and clients really construct portfolios. So if they've got a particular value set, that we can reflect that in portfolio. So we are getting more and more clients coming through that want to make sure that they're not invested in sort of carbon intense companies or oil and gas producers or those sorts of things, or also wanting to invest in climate solutions. So it's helping create portfolios that meet their values and meet their particular individual views on things. And the third part is that I also lead the firm on its own ESG journey, and that is just as important, because we need to walk the talk. And if we're going to be telling companies and others what to do in this space, we need to be acting ourselves. So I think it's important to have that branch in there. But so all of those elements actually have level of climate change integration and understanding in them, whether it's sort of driving initiatives internally to bring Forsyth Barr's own emissions down, or whether it's constructing portfolios that are low carbon, or whether it's research to drive the market and highlight that as investors we do expect and assess how companies are positioning themselves for a lower carbon, more sustainably oriented future. And recently I've been writing research that's assessing the climate disclosures that companies have been putting out for the first time last year. And that's driven by the new regulation that we've had in New Zealand. And I've just been sort of narrating and talking about the types of information that are coming out to the market, and whether it's useful for investors, whether it's what we would expect them to be talking about, and how we might be thinking about it in future investment decisions we make.
Thank you. That was really comprehensive. And I think you touched on something really important there around how that's a lever that we can all pull just in our day-to-day life around making sure that we're asking questions about where we're investing our money and is that responsible and does it align with our values. So thank you for that. So over your 20 years working in the responsible investment industry, what changes have you seen emerge about how people are concerned about climate in their investment portfolios and the veracity of climate impact assessments from companies? What more needs to be done in this space, in your view?
Yeah. Look, we're at a really, really interesting junction, I think, right now. But if I just go back a few years, back to 2015 when the Paris Accord was signed, because I think that was really a lever for mass movement from both corporates as well as investors on climate change. That was when lots of things came together with global collaboration and a really great awareness of the role of finance in the transition. And what followed was a couple of years when it felt like everyone, but it wasn't everyone, but it felt like everyone, if you're reading headlines, was, both corporates and investors kind of making net zero commitments, making really public statements about the need to support a 1.5 degree world and make sure we stayed on that track, and the importance of becoming net zero. And then I think we sort of, it was like a hype, a big bubble of activity. But I think what was sort of lacking, I guess, while the enthusiasm and the intent was there, what was lacking was actual concrete plans. And there was a lot of, I guess, talk and not so much action. And more recently, in the more recent years, we've seen, distrust creep in, and lots of companies have, not pulled back on their necessarily actions, but they've sort of pulled back on some of their longer term commitments that they've been making, and replacing that with shorter term, more practical roads and pathways, plans to get to where they need to be in the nearer term. And personally, I think that this is a really good thing, because I think it's important that we are practical and we are realistic with the plans that we make. And what we're seeing now is a lot more thoughtful and robust commitments coming through. And I think it's also been good because it has caught a few companies out around greenwashing, and I think it's important to lift the lid on that and let some sunshine and disinfectant in, and return to the practical realities of what we're trying to achieve, rather than just having some long-term aspirations and no action behind them. So ultimately, I think that we're really in a period of change and growing pains. And I hope that, in a few years' time, we'll be able to look back on this period and recognize that it felt awful and it felt hard, and it felt like we weren't getting anywhere. But actually, I think we're going through that really hard transitional piece right now. And we'll emerge out the other side in a stronger position, with a lot more clarity on how we're going to get to where we need to get to. Just hope it doesn't come too late in the process.
Thank you. So final question from me is, what are the key things that you think will be effective at enabling effective climate investment and action from business, and how can people partner to support these efforts?
Yeah, look, we're at a point in time where we really need bold leadership and strong commitments from boards. We need long-term thinking. And, I think I didn't really touch on the impact. Well, I didn't touch on the impact of Trump and my response to the last question, but this is another layer of lens that we need to put through. And Ella made a good comment about needing to depoliticize, and it's absolutely true. But one thing that is certain is that the decarbonisation trend is moving ahead anyway. I think it doesn't need policy support anymore. in lots of areas. It still needs a lot in more niche areas, but there is a big trend, especially internationally, for around renewables and movement away from coal. And with some of those countries internationally, unlike New Zealand, have big strides to make in those areas. I think, that trend is certainly going ahead, but what we have seen is, and even very recently, but actually over the last year and a half, is that sentiment and politicization of climate change has meant that it's been really, really tough for some industries to succeed. And so I think, we do still need bold boards, bold leadership and long-term thinking to sort of ride through these, as I sort of alluded to in my last question, to ride through this short-term pain and volatility. The other thing is that I genuinely think that the low-hanging fruit has been done now in sort of decarbonising. And we're at that stage now where we need really big, probably expensive, meaningful projects that shift the dial. And I think we're at the really hard part now, because if you sort of look superficially, some of the projects that are needed might not have a return on investment, at least in the short term. So I think, but if you think about it long term, and if you think about it in different ways of value, you really start to see there absolutely is a return on investment over the long term. So again, I think it's about boards and management being really brave in these areas and looking long term. And because we're at that stage where we need big projects that will meaningfully shift the dial, then absolutely collaboration is needed. There's as you say, we've all got to do our bit in the jigsaw puzzle, but for those really big, bold projects, no one country and no one company can do them or make the changes needed or carry the costs themselves. So absolutely, collaboration is a huge, big part of it. Just to end on a positive note, some of the research that we've found is that companies that have been measuring their carbon intensity for quite some time now, also say over 5, 6, 7 years, we're really starting to see good emissions reductions coming through over a long-term period. And it feels like, when I say that, I mean like a 5-year average. So it's not just, it's my first year, I'm going to make a few changes, and this is a longer term commitment that companies that have been moving kind of early on this agenda are really starting to see some good inroads into emissions reductions. And this was just some of the insights that we've been finding as we monitor what New Zealand companies are doing and how they're acting to manage climate change and get their emissions down. So I'm optimistic that, with experience and as you year on year after year, do your greenhouse gas emissions inventory and understand better where your emission sources are, and start to take the big and bold actions that we'll start to see progress, get some critical mass behind it.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that, Katie. So I think now we've got some time for some audience questions, and Zoe's just going to come around with the mic if you'd like to raise your hand and just sort of ask which panelist you might be directing that question to. And then if we've got anyone online, perhaps we can just pass over to you, Lucy, just to share those.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. But I was just going to make a comment about this particular book, Surviving Gabrielle, which I have given to National Council of Women, and I think I would like to leave this one here to the UN women. It is actually about what happened at Piha and Karikari, and the houses were taken and so forth. And it's 2 years ago, and it's still not complete. It was the volunteers. It is very much the volunteers who move in and help. But there's, even last week, as you found out, it's not just volunteers. Volunteers say that there's not sufficient access to the other areas and so forth. So that's part of it. But the other thing is this came out of Pan-Pacific Southeast Asia Women's Organization, which is a very old organization, and it's all around the Pacific. And we had a conference at the end of October, and the theme really was this: what are you doing in your country? And 10 countries stood up and talked about what they were doing to schools, to various places, wherever they were. Actually, the Taiwanese people had a particularly good one, and they had flooding in Taiwan at that very time. It was Thailand, Malaysia, Taiwan, Japan, Australia, Tonga, Fiji, Hawaii, and America. We didn't really have anything very much of that, but it so happened that I was at Christmas, and this book came out, which I know the person who wrote it. So that has actually gone out now to some of the schools, and we're trying to get money for it to go to other schools that they can find, that they will know about this, and it will help. But then I think I don't know how many of you here went to the NZIA conference at Zealandia, where there were 150 people, and many of them students, some of them secondary school, others were university students, and 15 ambassadors had to talk about the same thing. So that was quite important, I thought.
Thank you for that. Did you have a question for the panelists?
Well, I was just going to comment on the fact that I think we are improving, but it needs to be at that particular, at each level.
Cool. Thank you. And thank you for that lovely gift for you and Women Aotearoa as well.
I've sent it off now. It's gone to Europe. It's gone to
Oh, thank you. Are there other questions? Yeah.
Oh, kia ora. I've got a couple of questions, but only if I'm allowed them. I'll start with my first one, which was for Ella, and it was just around the REM incentive schemes, because that's quite big in a lot of other countries, but recentish research looking at New Zealand shows quite slow pickup of climate-related targets at executive REM, and just wondering if you could provide any thoughts on or commentary on other companies using that, what motivated Fonterra and how might others be motivated to do it?
Thank you. It's a really interesting question, and I'm afraid I actually don't know much about the New Zealand landscape there, although I do wonder with the advent of the New Zealand climate standards and the climate-related disclosure regime, if we will see more companies doing executive REM relating to climate. It is one of the mandatory disclosures there. So for those large listed entities, banks, insurers, etc., they will now have to say that they don't have any such incentives, and so that may drive some companies to have a think about whether that might be something that they would like to consider. From a Fonterra perspective, as I said, we do have something of a balanced scorecard for our short-term incentives, and with being a leader in sustainability, one of our 3 big strategic choices laid out in 2021, I think it really does just make sense that climate change is included in our executive REM. And I should also clarify, it's not just the top level of exec, it's not just C-suite, it's essentially all of our salaried workforce. But yeah, apologies, I'm not sure about the broader New Zealand environment there. I'd be really interested to know more about it. I have to do some reading.
Okay.
Sorry. The people online just asked if you could introduce yourself as well. It's fine to ask the question.
Oh, kia ora, I'm Judine Edgar. My other question was to Cheryl, and it was just around the role of philanthropy, and maybe some of this will be asked by the organisation you said that's going to be launched coming up. Just a lot of the funding at the moment around climate from philanthropic organisations is around education and upskilling rather than action, and doing some of those core shifts within their organisations because they're not necessarily seen as priorities. It doesn't get more people using your facility, for example, if you change to energy efficiency light bulbs or things like that. So is trying to get some of those sources, government and philanthropic ones, to look at how to prioritise climate action are going to be part of that advocacy coming forward?
I think I'll answer it. Great question. I think I'll answer it first from us at the Gift Trust, and then maybe I'll touch on the second bit. But funnily enough, I had almost this exact conversation yesterday with some donors of ours who came in for a meeting, and it's come up a few times recently. So yeah, I think, we're all aware, like basically we were saying, we don't need to fund any more awareness. People should be aware of this stuff. Sort of awareness and education feels a little bit in that easy bucket to me, in terms of any organisation can say they're running a campaign on awareness raising or education. It's important to do and great to do, but I do think that is some of that low-hanging fruit that Katie might have talked about earlier. I think the next step has to be practical steps. And so we as an organisation, some of the initiatives that we're doing through a couple of, actually several of our clients, but some of the more recent ones, we're funding like a small scheme in the Wellington region for volunteer-led practical solutions. So we're talking planting, but we're also talking ocean regeneration type of stuff, very practical, basically show us what you are actually doing on this problem and give us some proper outputs to report on. So there's a lot being done in that space. And I think the philanthropic sector broadly is looking at practical action now, not education. So that's what I'm seeing mostly across the board. I can't speak for everyone in the philanthropic sector. The new entity I mentioned is still forming, but they're looking at quite a different space. I think they're looking at quite deep level lobbying and collaboration at a government level, which is a little bit different. I think there is a lot of funding going towards practical action now, but I just don't think there's actually much coordinated effort across the country to bring it together. We're talking lots of small volunteer-led entities, and perhaps the next stage would be a systems change approach to look at the whole sector as a whole.
Oh, kia ora, Julie Haggie from Transparency International, New Zealand. I had a question for Elly, if she's online. Elly, Rosita, Silaban.
I'm here.
Oh, good. Great. So I was interested in this, the gender aspect of the just transition, really. And I had sort of two questions. One, I was in discussions with industries like agriculture and fisheries. Are you seeing a shift in the way, in how that, whether they're taking on the gender aspects of women? Are you seeing it at a policy level? And are you seeing it also at the sort of union level of actually taking that strong gender focus on just transition and climate efforts to counter climate change? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, the workers who the representative of women during the discussion with industry or government is not really represent there. Is not really present there. So they just give the issue to the male, and male try to deliver it directly or to express it directly with industry. That's why we organize such a training for only women who can negotiate and also who can express their thought about the issue, because when they in absent during the discussion with industry or the management or other partner, they can directly express what is their face right now. So sometimes we fail when we go directly to the document they prepare, because they forgot to mention about the gender issue inside the concept. So that's why we have to sitting with them to make sure that this paragraph or this sentence should be put on the, or you can say directly to the industry, so they will thinking about the woman right, something like that, or at least they from the team who will be spoke directly with the industry should be female, because they understand what they face and also what really wants to say and also put on their policy. However, right now we didn't see the special content mentioned about the gender issue, especially about the female. But this is our task, our role, to push them to brave and also to say directly, if you can, if you only send the content, your thought or your mind to other male, sometimes they will forget. So you have to present there and also say directly. I think it's not really easy to how to say, to ask them to sitting or to be voice about their problem, but we now prepare some female, young female, and also from each sector of for women to sitting and also will be included to the negotiation. Yeah.
Apologies, you can't see me online, but I've just got a question from Shannon, and she asks, curious if anyone has seen any experimentation in new economic models moving away from profit, GDP, and capitalism.
Are any of the panelists wanting to? Oh, is it Katie?
Yeah, I was just going to pop in on that just to say, I'm not sure that I've seen companies brave enough to experiment with those sorts of things, but what I, not the large listed ones anyway, but what I have been seeing is a decoupling of growth with emissions, which is really, really encouraging to see. But there are some really interesting initiatives going around. And the degrowth one I'm sort of watching from afar to, I think that's a really interesting model to see if that could get some critical mass behind companies. If any of them were brave enough to kind of work through that, it would be really interesting to see.
I'll just pop in on that after you as well, Katie. I was going to mention the degrowth movement too, purely because something I haven't mentioned that we do on the sidelines is we run a separate project called Gift Collective. It's a fiscal sponsorship program. So basically small charitable entities that don't have charitable status in New Zealand, because that can be costly and admin heavy, they sit under our umbrella and we run their back end finances for them, take the donations, and we actually auspice Degrowth Aotearoa, which is an entity that sits under there. I don't know a huge amount of their work, but I know that it's a forming model in Aotearoa following on from some international work. So it's slightly counterintuitive, perhaps a philanthropic trust which manages donations from people's wealth to be also auspicing a degrowth organisation, but we'll set that aside.
Oh, thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Oh, yeah, there's one.
Just a very brief one to Cheryl. When you talk about education, are you talking about awareness?
In relation to the earlier question?
Yes, in relation to what you were talking about earlier, I understood you to say that education was no longer necessary.
Oh, I didn't mean it as far as that. Perhaps I was being slightly tongue-in-cheek. I just think that awareness raising is something that many organisations sometimes seek funding for, and awareness raising on climate, it has to be done in quite a specific way nowadays because people are aware. But I agree, there's a lot of good education work, lots of fantastic entities that are doing education work with school children,
yes,
garden to table, doing gardening, even things like that that are very practical and that have climate implications.
Practical things like recycling, I'm finding, people, I mean, I'm a passionate recycler and a sort of obsessive about it. But people in households who don't understand that soft plastic, to provide a really parochial example, can be recycled. Yeah, so methinks more work could be done in the area of awareness.
Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. It's okay. Yeah, there's one here too. Yeah.
Hi, Hannah Taylor-Moller from World Vision New Zealand. I just had one for Ella, just while I've got a Fonterra person. I'm just interested when you talk about, Ella, you're talking about sort of some of these incentives, and we sort of imagine these grass-fed cows with big paddocks, but I'm just wondering about intensive dairying. And are you guys de-incentivizing that, or where does that fit on the spectrum of what you're trying to do?
It's a really, really interesting question. And I think when it comes to dairying, sometimes the different sustainability or environmental outcomes are actually in conflict with each other. So in many cases, a more intensive dairying approach can be lower emissions, and that's quite counterintuitive. And if we think about the New Zealand pasture-based or grass-fed approach, that's historically given us a real advantage in terms of being lower emissions than our overseas barn-based grain-fed competitors. But when we think about some of these exciting new innovative technologies that could reduce methane emissions, actually we are at risk of being leapfrogged. But I think probably most of us in Aotearoa would agree that a cow outside on grass is probably a healthier and better off cow than a cow in a kind of battery farming environment. So there's some sort of really interesting complexities, I think, between metrics that all really matter, like animal health and well-being, emissions, and water quality. Does that sort of start to get at it? I'm sorry, I feel like I've perhaps
That's cool.
the meat
I'll
of
follow
your
up.
question.
Yeah, no, I can follow up later. Just wanting to find out what Fonterra's standpoint was on it specifically. But
yeah, we don't have a specific target around stocking rates, if that was the question. And it is a co-op wide emissions reduction target for on-farm. So there's different ways that can be achieved regardless of your stocking rate. I think perhaps maybe one anecdote that's quite interesting is I was on farm recently at one of our farmers in Te Rao, and he's been a Fonterra farmer for quite some time. When he started farming probably kind of 20 odd years ago, he had a herd size of about 400. He's now got a herd size of 220 on that same land, and he's producing the same amount of milk. So it is quite possible to be really productive and reduce your stocking rate, and that also reduces emissions intensity. That won't be possible for all farmers and all farming systems, but we're hearing some really good stories about balancing and actually getting good outcomes across a variety of metrics, but no specific target on stocking rates.
okay, thank you.
Hi, sorry, I'll just keep this short because I think people will probably want to be heading home sooner or later. So I just had a question for maybe Elly, but it's open to the whole panel. So there was a little bit of talk about women in industries such as agriculture. And women can actually produce, or do actually produce, up to 80% of the world's agriculture in some parts of the world, which is really impressive. But they are also the ones that are getting the brunt of climate change. And this is because their work has been historically undervalued. So I was just kind of wondering how to advocate for women when a lot of their work is just designated as women's work or domestic labor and is not necessarily paid labor or something that we can see remunerated or a part of GDP or global growth. Yeah, thank you.
Excuse me, can you repeat again because the connection here is not really good?
Yeah, so I'll just do like a shorter version of the question so I don't have to, these people don't have to hear it again. But how do we sort of advocate for women, especially in agricultural spaces that are undergoing domestic labor or unpaid labor because of labor that's been historically designated as women's work that doesn't directly contribute to the GDP? How do we advocate for them in these spaces? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, the leader of the workers' organization who stay in the capital is not really in touch with them, but through their sectoral who affiliate to our organization, prepare their own training and also try to live with them. And also, yeah, we prepare actually the paper for campaign and explain everything. Because you know the women who work in agriculture and also in fisheries not really come from the high education. So we have to adapt and also adjust our language and also a very simple word to explain to them that if you understand if you take the role about this issue, you can rise your your position, and also the decent life for your family, and also decent work and decent wage for or decent earn from for your female group, something like that. And we cannot directly leave them, but we have to evaluate and monitor. Sometimes we have to stay with them and also to accompanying them to go to industry, and also to talk directly with their management or their boss in their agriculture, for example, for the what is that oil, palm oil, and also the female who send the fish from the result of their husband, and sometimes they will forget and they will leave it if they cannot suddenly accept the result from their discussion or from their demand. So we have to stay there and also asking the apparatus from their village to accompany them, because sometimes they really believe with people surrounding them than organizations. So we collaborate with the people in village and the head of the village to meet with them to make agreement, even though the what is that, not really in the position paper, but through the oral, to say them that okay, we come together, collaborate between workers, the people in village, and also your management, and sometimes we also work together with the NGO. Yeah, because when we asking them to stay in the rule or to continue to campaign or to negotiate or to say about their life, they will say, okay, we cannot make it, but please stay with us, at least someone with us who knows about the regulation and also the right, and also how the role of the trade union in national, and also how the role of the partner in international, such as ITUC, and also they understand when ITUC can also campaign about their life. Actually, we give responsible for their federation, for example, Federation of Agriculture, Federation of Fishery, Federation of Hotel, Federation of Garment Textile, to accept, to accommodate, and also to manage the discussion with the industry. And then sometimes we also monitor about it. Sometimes we succeed and agree with industry to put something about the right, about the sustainable, but sometimes we also fail. So we still continue to fight for them, but not really easy, as I say directly to you, but we have to make sure that they continue to fight for it for themselves, and also we help them to make it through.
Thank you, Elly. I think we might finish now. Actually, I had a quick question for Katie. You have a lot of research, and I just wondered if you're able to share any of it with us, and we can share those links.
Sure. Yes, you can. Yeah, you can find stuff on the Forsyth Barr website, but I will send you through some direct links as well, because sometimes it's a little difficult to find. But certainly, I will do that, and we can add it to the communications post the event.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to pass over to Maddie now to just close the event. Thank you.
Thank you. I will keep this brief. Thank you to those of you who are still with us. I know everyone will be itching to get home to have some dinner. So as we come to the end of this evening's Women at the Table on Climate Change panel, I want to extend a very heartfelt thank you to our wonderful speakers. So we had Elly, Ella, Jo, Cheryl and Katie. Thank you so much for your time, your expertise and your leadership. You've brought such a depth and clarity to this evening's conversation, and we're so grateful for your contributions. So a special thank you also to our collaborating partners, the National Council for Women and the Council for International Development, for helping to bring this event to life this evening. And of course, thank you to all our guests that have joined us for this important conversation. And we know that you're all doing important mahi in your own spaces in advancing climate action and gender equality. So we're pleased to let you all know that a recording of tonight's session will be made available online, and please feel free to share it with your colleagues or revisit the kōrero when it suits you. So we look forward to welcoming you at the next instalment of this event series, Women at the Table on Climate Change. And until then, safe travels home, and we will look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone online.